Order here, regulated industries and utilities. This will be our first meeting of the year. Appreciate everybody showing up. Looks like pretty much a full house. I know it's difficult under COVID times, but we hope that we do have an audience out in the hall or on live stream so everybody can keep track of the proceedings of this committee. We got a few new members this year. I'm happy to welcome Senator Tanya Anderson and my good friend Senator Gloria Butler on the committee. I think everybody else, Senator Dockerett, I think you're a new addition. So pleased to have three new members of the committee. We lost a couple from attrition that retired or moved on. And we are back. We're still an 11-member committee according to the Senate rules, but we do have 3 ex officio members. I have the proposed rules in the folder, and those rules keep the quorum at 6. That's based on a majority of the 11 full-time members of the committee. Take a few minutes if you'd like and review these rules. I'll point out that the only change is rule number 8, dealing with committee substitutes. I think all of you will remember, certainly our rules chairman remembers with glee, the proposed committee substitute that was brought to us by a author of the bill that was not a legislator and didn't have an LC number on it. And I think we kind of learned from that committee substitutes are really properly prepared by the chairman after considering amendments, or that. That's exactly how we did it, Mr. Chairman. We showed them what we thought of that proposal and dispensed with it immediately. But that did, you know, all humor aside, show when we vote a bill out that has been amended, we vote it out, LC, whatever the number is, as amended by committee substitute. Because anytime we have amended a bill, that is a substitute of our committee for the original introduced document. Especially gets important after crossover day when we have members from the other side that are putting other bills together with the bill they started off with at the House that have maybe not even been vetted in their committees or on their floor. And it's unfair to the public and the interested parties and lobbyists and entities out there to not be aware of what the contents of the bill are. And so if you have significant amount of amendments that would, warrant the redrawing of the bill, bring those to me in advance and ask me if I'll be willing to prepare a committee substitute. Don't come try to spring it on us here at the meeting. And you're always free to bring any amendments to the bill, and it'll be worked into a committee sub after it's gone through the printing presses at Legislative Council. But I would like to reserve the power that I'll present the committee subs after considering the request of our members. Certainly I give preference to senators, but no ill will towards the House. But when House members come over with bills, we don't know their complete history, and it's not appropriate to come to our committee meeting presenting a committee sub that we haven't had a chance to see until we get here. So that's the only change I've made to the rules. Any questions? Senator Mullis.
I'd like to make a motion after careful review of your rules, and let me say how fair and just they are. I move that we pass.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Excuse me, discussion. I tell you what, he probably noticed that I plagiarized most of his rules in the preparation of these. I followed the senior Republican member of the Senate's wisdom and guidance here. So.
Under the counsel of my good friend, the Democrat leader.
All right. Were there any other questions? I didn't mean to jump the gun on a vote there. All right. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, like signal. All right, let's please record that then as a unanimous vote from those present. The next thing on our agenda for today, as you all are aware, we've spent, literally several years. Senator Gooch in particular has done many things to try to expand broadband availability in Georgia. One of the original, I guess, tenets, was it SB2, Senator Gooch, back in the day? That you SB 402. 402. And the 402 called for us to have a mapping of the state to see where exactly do we have broadband, where is it available, the high-speed internet connections. And the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at UGA had been tasked with that job, and they have come up with the maps. And so I have asked today to have Mr. Eric McRae from the Carl Vinson Institute of Government give us the presentation and go through and let's see where we stand. Dr. McRae, good to have you. Can you hear us? We can see you on our Zoom screen.
I can hear you just fine.
All right, then I'd like to turn the floor over to you, and if you will just kind of walk us through the mapping project and what we've learned from that to see the availability of broadband in the state of Georgia.
I'd be happy to, and thank you for letting me present today. First off, I want to make it clear that this was a team effort. This was not anything that was done solely by the Institute of Government. The lead agency on this was the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. We also had a lot of assistance from the Georgia Technology Authority, and none of this would have been possible had we not had participation from the 44 providers of broadband in the state of Georgia that allows us to map at this detail. No other state has done this to this point, and I think what we've built here is extremely powerful information. So with that, I'm going to start with showing you some of the maps. And the first map I'm going to show you is why we mapped this in the first place. And this is the FCC versus the Georgia Broadband Map. And I'm going to swipe this over here real quickly. I'm going to describe this map a little bit. Can y'all see the map all right?
Do you have the ability to enlarge that in any way for us?
I think I might be able to. Let me give it a whirl.
If you could, it might make it easier for the committee. That's helpful, yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
All right, fantastic, thank you.
So when we look at this map, this is the FCC version of the map from June of 2019. The yellow areas are the unserved areas of the state. The orange areas are the served areas of the state, and the gray areas are those areas that have no locations. And so this is what the FCC was presenting as being what is served in the state of Georgia. And this is where we were looking at it and thinking this can't be right. And so Senate Bill 402 defined a served census block as any census block that had 80% or more of the locations as having service. When we applied that methodology to it, and we were looking at it now at a location level versus a census block level, the FCC capturing their data at the census block level. If a single location is served, the census block is served. And so we have a much more granular look at it. When we look at that using our information and what we've collected, and as I swipe here to the right, you'll see the map quickly changes to more of a yellow map than an orange map. And that's basically showing all the areas which are unserved. Obviously, Atlanta, your metropolitan areas, those areas are going to be served pretty much so no matter what. And what we're defining as being served is access to broadband at a speed of 25 megs down and 3 megs up. So I'll talk about 25.3, and that's what I'm talking about here. It's 25 down, 3 up, or greater. So you may have gigabit at your house. That's fine. You'll be served. But if you're getting 10.1 or common DSL, you're not going to show up as being served on this map. And so it's a stark difference when you start to look at this map between what the FCC says is served versus what the state of Georgia says is served. We also have maps that will actually give you more detailed information about the different areas. And so if we come in here and we look at this, quickly, the legend once again, yellow is unserved, orange is served. The gray here is going to be no locations. That means that there's no data, there's no addresses or buildings or serviceable addresses in those census blocks. It may be swamp, it may be a military base. For whatever reason, there's no locations there. The blue area that you see right here, this is an area which is a petition area. And we allowed providers 3 opportunities to basically provide input when we were collecting the data. When we initially started to build the maps. We allowed them to provide us with all the data for all the locations where they were served. We then mapped that. We handed back those locations to them and said, take a look at this and confirm that this is correct. Now, unfortunately, when we started that process was right at the start of the pandemic, when we were handing back the information and people were scrambling left and right. So not everybody had the opportunity to go through and confirm it. Well, we also had a window where they are allowed to petition and say, hey, you know what, we didn't get to look at this during the quality control phase of the project, but when we looked at it, we want to dispute that we feel this area is more served. And so we had the opportunity for them to petition an area, and that's what this blue area delineates right here is a petition. But if I select on any given county, and I'll just select one at random, Jasper County, we immediately see that we have 4,601 unserved locations in this county. There are 2,710 served locations, so the percent unserved in Jasper County is 63%. If we zoom to that county, we can get in much closer. And as we get in closer, we can select an individual census block and get information. So we can see that there are 21 served locations and 21 unserved locations in here. So the percent unserved is 50%. So this is the reason this shows up as an unserved census block. Now, just because a census block is served does not mean that all locations are served. In this case, we have 6 served locations and 1 unserved location for a total percentage of 14. It's less than 20%, so that is a served census block. But that does not necessarily mean that all locations in that census block will be served. Oops. The next map that I'll show you allows you to look at a little bit more detailed information based upon geography. And so once again, we have the yellow being unserved, the orange being served, the blue being the petition area, and the gray being no locations. But what this map allows us to do is go in, and we can still just click on a location or a county, but we also have the ability to query. And so here we can say, let's find it by Senate district. And I happen to know that Senator Gooch, who is very involved in this, lives in the 51st district. If I apply that, it takes me to that district, and it shows me that we have 33,694 unserved locations in that district and 85,277 served locations for a total percent unserved of 28%. So we can get a very detailed look at just about any geography we want. We can come in here and we can, once again, zoom in closer, select any census block, and get the details for that census block. We also have statewide statistics, which when you first look at the first blush, it says 10% unserved in the state. Well, that seems great. But when you look at the rural percentage, we're a much higher unserved rate when you look at rural. We're about 30% unserved statewide from a rural standpoint. And so we have 507,341 locations in the state of Georgia currently that are unserved per the map that was created last year. Obviously, we've had build out across the state. In the map refresh that we're working on right now, we'll hope to see these numbers come down. A fourth map that was created, and this was created by DCA staff, was looking at the Wi-Fi availability. And this is free Wi-Fi across the state. And this was important, especially when the pandemic started and students got sent home all over the place, and all of a sudden they had to do homework, do virtual learning, and they didn't have access to broadband at home necessarily. Well, we can come in here and we can find just about any location here where we say, let's say Mary Vincent Memorial Library, open 24/7, they have free access to Wi-Fi. And so we have all the different locations around the state, which were identified through working with the Department of Education, the library system, the different colleges, and things like that, that had access to free Wi-Fi. This does not include all of your McDonald's and Chick-fil-A's and all that. This wasn't a business audit of basically finding the different locations. This is purely public spaces that have free access. So kids can go to the parking lot and do their homework and such if they did not have Wi-Fi at home. We also have the ability for folks, if they want to download the data, they have the ability to download that data. They can use it as a web mapping service where they can consume it into maps that they want to basically put on their website. They can download the data as a spreadsheet, or they can actually download it as the GIS file so they can do their own analysis, whether they want to do their analysis in their own county, their city, or what have you. They have access to all the data that's in the background at the census block level. So those are the maps that are available, that are publicly available, that we built out. This was a very involved process to build these maps. It started out with the purchase of a master address file from a commercial data set. We then took that address file, we standardized the addresses across that data set, as well as all the incoming data from all the providers. We went through a standardization process with that so we could do that match. We then matched all those locations. We then pushed that information back out to the providers to allow them to look at that, confirm it, and then we brought everything back in. We merged everything together, and then we applied that information to the census block level to create these maps. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the process, about how we built the maps, any questions y'all might have.
Thank you, Eric. I have just a couple, and then I know Senator Albers has a few questions as well. I think it might help us if you could sort of describe what kind of quality information you can upload or download at these speeds at 25, I guess that's megabytes.
Sure.
We're talking about. I think that we are seeing so much more video downloads and telemedicine and school, virtual learning, that I need us to have a concept of what you can get at those speeds.
So at 25.3, you can have it where, and I'll put it in terms that people can understand. Because when we start talking about megabytes and bits and everything else like that, it gets a little confusing. You can have so if you're downloading and you're using Netflix, you need about 5 megs of download to bring in an HD movie. And so you can have a situation where you're sitting in one room watching a movie on Netflix, and your kids can be in 2 other rooms doing their homework through some type of virtual learning environment. And you can probably have someone else doing email. And then you're pretty much still pushing the max of what you can do with 25.3. You're not going to be able to push a lot of information up because, once again, it's 3 megs up. But generally speaking, you're not pushing information up, you're pulling information down. So with 25.3, you can have multiple HD videos coming into your location, and you're not going to tax your system too heavily. You're not going to be buffering constantly or anything like that. You can do basic video conferencing with 25.3. You can do all of that. Now, you can't have it where you have 6 people in the house doing all of that at the same time. At that point in time, you're going to saturate your network, and you're not going to have enough bandwidth.
Mama Gooch was having problems last year when the Gooch grandchildren were over there playing those video games, and she couldn't play Words with Friends on the internet. So I was wanting to make sure for Thanksgiving.
Exactly, and that's a big challenge, especially video games are intensive when they start. I don't play them, but I've had folks in my house that do it, and it just sucks up the bandwidth quickly.
Okay, and let's say it's a business location. If I'm down in one of these unserved areas in South Georgia and I want to sell my goods or services on the internet, as so many people are doing now, what do I need from the upload angle to be a meaningful role in commerce?
So that's where you're going to become challenged with 25.3. You're going to want at least 15 to 20 megs up. You're probably going to want to have a little bit more to ensure that you're not having a disruption in service. But for the most part, though, unless you have a server at your location where you're trying to push the information out, you probably won't have too much of a challenge with that. You're going to want to be able to do e-commerce, which is going to be very small as far as the transactions and the sizes. But if you're trying to push all of your information out with pictures, videos, and such from a server at your location, you're going to need quite a bit more than, you're probably going to need at least 25, if not 50 going up to be able to do that.
Okay. I'm going to recognize Senator Albers for a couple of questions we were discussing offline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, let me begin by thanking you for putting this together. That very insightful for what we have learned. I do have a question, but a comment first, and I appreciate what you're saying about watching an HD video, but 5 meg is really the absolute bare minimum to watch that.
Correct.
As most things are going to 4K, you need a minimum of 25. Right? And that's really kind of the low-end threshold. And I know that we're preaching to the choir here, but how many of each one of us has 10 or 12 devices connected now? Right?
Correct.
There's lots of stuff connected that will take that up. So I know we talked about this in the past. In fact, Senator Gooch, I think, allowed me to take us from 10.1 to 25.3 back in the day. I think 110 should be probably our very bare minimum now, and even that may not be enough in the future. But what I want to get back to is that the map was very telling. But I think that map you showed us, the first one, was wired access, right? That's what
That is correct.
Okay.
This is wireline terrestrial access. This does not include satellite internet, and this does not include LTE. But this will include fixed wireless, both the unlicensed and licensed spectrum as far as what might be served there. But it'll be fixed wireless versus mobile.
Completely understood. That makes sense. And I asked the chairman, I think we need to bring in both the current existing LSAT satellite service providers as well as the new low-level satellite providers are out there, and probably bring in at least the 3 major wireless companies who are broadcasting out either 4G or 5G of LTE, depending on where they are in their build-out. Because in some cases, we're never going to have wired lines out to certain places. It will never make sense. But if I'm going to make a quick assumption, and you can tell me what you think, but satellite's going to cover pretty much every single corner of the state of Georgia today. Would it not?
Yeah. I'm not going to speculate what it's ultimately going to do. In theory, yes, it should.
Okay, so the bare minimum for satellite now is 100 down and 10 up. So I think what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're analyzing this correctly from the legislature to say that everybody can get high-speed internet access. Some are going to get it a lot more on fiber, which is going to be obviously almost unlimited bandwidth, and some are going to get it in wireless. Now, I'm not saying that satellite is the best, but I also know some businesses that are very rural areas that have 3 or 4 satellites up. And they take that and they bind that bandwidth together in order to do the things they need to get done. So I just think we ought to be careful, because where we expand out a wireline or fiber is extraordinarily expensive. And wireless is coming in many different ways, shapes, and forms, whether it be the current LSATs, as I mentioned, the low-level satellites, the things that the Elon Musks of the world are doing, and or the build-out of LTE.
Got any other questions about the maps? All right. Other senators have questions? Senator Anderson.
Button, I'm sorry.
I'll get you lit up as number 4. Let's find out.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question about the maps. The gentleman showed us how when you scrolled over and the map was still showing some, I guess, unserved communities, or having used the census and it's in the 80% block. How is that much better now? Or how can you show from the map areas that are, I'm sorry, my question is, does it still show areas on the map that are unserved? When you scroll?
I assume you're talking about this map right here. And when I show the
Comparison, yes, I'm sorry.
The comparison. So this is how the FCC defines the map. This is how the federal government's defining it.
Okay.
And this is how Georgia's defining it. So all the areas that are yellow here are unserved areas.
Okay.
All right, Senator Ginn, I think saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, I'm not sure if there was a run on attorneys in the state, everybody wants to use them at the same time, that creates a problem. But when I look at the internet, you talked about downloading a movie or watching a movie or something like that. If, it's kind of like traffic situation, you get too much at one time. Do we need to change the laws in copyright movies and things like that so that, you could download a movie, don't have to do it real time. You could do it in the middle of the night when nobody else is using that capability. Is there something that we need to do from a resource side of things to make it where we can use the internet more instead of everybody hitting that movie at 7 to 11 at night? Let them download it different hours of the day.
Sir, I make maps. I don't make policy. I'm sorry. I don't really have an answer for you there. There's a lot that can go into something like that, and that's not something I really could speculate on how best to approach that.
Well, let me ask you. Let me follow up on that question, because one of the things that, for me, I see in my area of the state is there'll be good internet speed at off hours, non-peak hours, and then it all gets chopped up and it crashes in the peak hours of the day. And I don't know on your maps what time of day you reference that, but for me, that's one of the issues that we saw with the technology a lot of people call DSL. Said they were divvying up that pie so much that you couldn't do it, except for off-peak hours.
And that this map represents what would basically be best case scenario. This is not representing during peak times or anything like that. And depending upon the technology that you have, it will dictate how much that stuff gets sliced and diced. And so that does become a challenge. And so the key thing there is having that backbone, the fiber and all that in the ground that allows them to basically add additional capacity, which is, I think, something that all these providers are working on doing.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. I'm going to recognize, no, we'll get back to you. Senator Brass, you're next.
I was just going to say, Chairman, again, you're describing a traffic issue. That'd be better for your committee and transportation.
Senator Anderson,
So
can you get us back on track?
Thank you, sir. So my question, I guess, then, since the comparison of FCC and the state of Georgia, why is the FCC showing that we have a larger coverage area? Or is
So-
that?
That's your question.
Oh, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
So,
I'm sorry.
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, go ahead.
Okay, so the FCC, when they were collecting the data, they were collecting it at a census block level. And the way it was being reported was, if you serve a single location in a census block, that census block is shown as being served. When we looked at the data, we felt that that was not the best way to approach it. We wanted to look at it at a more granular level. We wanted to look at it at the location level. And so that's when what was put into the legislation was that 80% or more of the locations had to be served. And so that's why our maps are vastly different from the FCC map. If there's a single location served in a census block, the FCC shows that as being served. They're actually, I think, in the process of changing their model, so it'll be more granular as well. But like I said, we are far ahead of that curve looking at these problems and issues. We wanted to make sure that we had good data to make good decisions in the state of Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you know the size of the average or normal census block? Is it geographic or number of households?
There is no average size. I'm sure there's an average size when you add them all up, but in the state of Georgia, some can be as small as a city block, and some can be as large as a third of a county. There's no rhyme or reason as far as the number of people in a census block. Some have hundreds, some have 2, some have none. So it's kind of all over the place.
Okay. Mr. Whip, Senator Gooch, could you give us a little background? This was sort of your brainchild, as you're more or less the grandfather of broadband expansion in Georgia. I know it's hadn't happened yet, but this was part of the groundwork you were laying, that you felt like we needed to know where we stood before we dug in and started attacking the problem. Give us your thoughts on the importance of the mapping and what we could or should do with this data. I think I got you at number 13 over there.
Yeah, it all started back when we did the study committee. We had a joint study committee. We went around the state, and everywhere we went, rural Georgia, we heard the same comments. Kids can't do homework, can't get on the internet. Download speeds weren't 10.1. They were a half of 1 and almost nothing. So, I mean, it was terrible. DSL lines were basically those copper wires that we talked about where your party lines operated from in the 70s and the 60s. So we started looking at the maps, and the FCC maps showed Georgia being in better shape than we thought we were. And we started asking questions, how did you get this data? And that's when we discovered that if one house in a census block had coverage of 10.1 or greater, then they considered the entire block as a served area. Whereas Eric just said, a census block could be 10 miles wide. And we knew that wasn't appropriate, it wasn't accurate. So we said we had to have better data. And so that's what led to the discussions as we moved over the next 6 months to a year to draft our first bill, was to do an inventory of Georgia, find out literally where the unserved areas were. And that's when we deployed GTA and Carl Vinson and all the others. We also did some speed tests. If you remember, we had a real simple link that we sent out on Facebook that said, go online and do this survey and do this speed test, and we started gathering data off of that as well. And so it was just a lot of raw data that was put together. These guys were the geniuses that put together the maps, and it truly shows that the FCC was wrong. And then we went to DC and we talked with Sonny Perdue and his folks at USDA, and they started getting involved too around the country, having the same problem everywhere, not just here. And so it's been about a 4-year process, and we continue to look for money. And that's what's going to really eventually solve this problem. Is it's going to take probably $1 billion in some private and public funding.
Is it your sort of a dream that these maps will show us where to direct grant money or subsidies or funding as available?
Correct. So part of SB 402 utilizes the mapping to give DCA the tool to approve the grants. And so the grants that are now available through state funding and federal funding tie the grant applications to the mapping, and the money has to be used in these unserved areas. So it doesn't just get put in an urban downtown city setting versus, rural Georgia. So the money will be directed in the areas where there are unserved regions of the state. So been very effective so far. Several grants have been issued, and we'll continue to do more as this money comes through. So the governor put, $20 million in the budget that we're about to consider. That's a good start, but it's going to have to take much more than that to fix it.
Are there other committee members with questions? Senator Tippins, we'll get to you in a second. I got Senator Tippins first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, clarification, when you use the term served, you're talking about internet service available to a location and not necessarily subscribe to the service. Is that correct?
That is correct. This is access only. They have access to it. That does not necessarily mean that they subscribe to it or can afford it. That's another issue, is affordability. But
under your matrix that you used, it was the census block had to be 80% of the census block locations had to be served to be in orange coloration. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, sir. I couldn't hear you on that one.
80% of the locations in the census block had to be served to
Correct.
Have the dark coloration.
Correct. 80% or greater have to have access to service in order to be considered served in the Georgia model.
Did you run any other percentages on that, or how hard would that be? I mean, like if you had census blocks that had no service whatsoever, or maybe 20% or 40 or 60, that may tell you the cost that it would take to implement, because you may have somebody that's at 75%, it may not be that much more expensive. It looks to me like the differences in percentage served over a wider range would give you a better estimate of what it would take to actually get broadband.
Correct. And we actually work with the GBDI team works with counties and local governments when they're looking at doing broadband expansions in their areas, working with their providers to provide them with those types of detailed maps that show them that information, that shows them that, here are your areas that, have, the percentage served, or more importantly, the number of locations that are unserved. You may have it where you have, 50 location or 50 census blocks which are unserved, but they only have 2 people per census block, which it's 100 people. But you also have 10 census blocks that are unserved, but they have 200 people per census block that are unserved. And so all of a sudden, you have a volume here that you can look at and where you can basically bring service. And you usually find that on the periphery of cities and communities, that's usually the easiest place to add service. They may be areas that are unserved, but they already have service in those locations. So we help communities and counties look at that information all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tippins. My sweet mate, Senator Harbison, I recognize you for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to make a statement sort of in support of the comments by the Chairman Gooch and the members of this committee. I'm just acutely interested, as I know most of us here are, about making sure that we deal with the underserved, fill those, I got Macon, Marion, Taylor, Talbot, Schley, and all those counties out there, the schools out there. I think it's a great digital divide that we need to close as quickly as possible. I didn't know about the $20 million in this year's budget. I'm glad to know that, and I'm just really interested in being part of the solution and figuring out ways how we can use that map and start to begin to make some real inroads into solving this problem. We've been passing laws. I think we did 2 or 3 laws we passed, but I think we need to put it together and get together, and let's just go ahead and take care of it for the state of Georgia. I'm really proud to be part of this committee, and I look forward to working with everybody in every context to make sure that we get it done prayerfully this session, 2-year session, I mean. Thank you.
And can I make a quick comment on that?
Sure.
When the pandemic started and all the schools shut down and all the kids had to go home, we were in the midst of completing this map for the first time. And so we had a lot of raw information. We were able to we worked with the Department of Education to go through and map every single student in the state, their home location, to determine how many students were unserved in the state, did not have access at all. There are 3 counties that pretty much every student does not have access to broadband. We're able to take that information and put it to immediately, that data, and put it to use to place Wi-Fi rangers, working with providers around school districts that did not have access to broadband, to provide wireless access points for students to start getting access to broadband for doing homework and virtual school learning. We've also used this data to help identify housing, the subsidized housing locations that have students in them, where we can bring in Wi-Fi and things like that. And so a lot of work has been done using these maps, this data, at that granular level to help inform decisions for helping get those folks hooked up. And so it's all possible because we had this information, and it was fortuitous that we had it right as the pandemic was starting.
Thank you, Eric. Chairman Harbison, I appreciate your comments on that, and I know that all of us here, regardless of our party or what area of the state we're from, are on the same mission to increase broadband availability throughout Georgia. Seems to me that even the haves in the metropolitan areas need the have-nots to have it, so they can, if nothing else, provide medical services, education, and commerce to them. Get them to buy their products online if they can get to it. It helps us all, and it's a necessity of life in Georgia. I think some of this from the original SB 402 was the foundation being built, the building blocks, the ground floor of our plans to try to get that broadband out. We made some attempts with SB 2 a couple of years ago to give the EMCs the authority, the ability to provide these services and to access the grants. And to my knowledge, I don't think any of them have done that in the last 2 years. We had legislation last year to try to encourage broadband deployment in those territories, and I think after recent PSC actions, that may have actually set it back instead of advance it forward. What I'm calling on is all of you come forward with your ideas. Let's see some other legislative ideas, and Senator Gooch, it may simply be funding. That this is such a massive capital expenditure that maybe the free markets don't have the incentives to be able to do that, and it's not fair for us to expect people to do it at a loss. Senator Gooch, ideas there?
Just to, not to correct you, but to add a little bit to what you were talking about, the EMCs have actually made significant progress. In fact, if we have time next week, we should ask them to come in and give a similar presentation. I think you'll be impressed with how far they've moved in a short time. They didn't get certified until last year by the PSC, late last year. Back in my district in Gilmer County, the Amicalola Electric just signed a partnership with ETC Telephone, and they're going to be providing gigabit service to the home to a good portion of Gilmer and portions of Lumpkin County where I live. And so we're going to be seeing significant improvements in the next 18 months because of their efforts. And so there's been 3 other EMCs, I believe, that have already gotten approvals and it's moving forward. So I don't want to misquote the numbers, but I would love to see them come in.
Yeah,
and give a
I would too.
presentation.
I've asked them over the years to please keep me apprised of any progress. I hadn't heard any since last year, but we'll give everybody an opportunity to come in and tell us, and also to share ideas of what we can do to incentivize, promote.
Absolutely.
Let's push this broadband out. Senator Tippins.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
I'm sorry, you got a question? Senator Butler, did you have a question? I'm gonna come right back to you after Tippins.
ahead,
I'm sorry, you didn't aggressively raise your hand enough. You're so demure, I didn't see it. I'll catch you next time.
Let the minority leader go first.
All
I
right,
respect
we're
her
gonna-
greatly. Go ahead.
The
Go
gentleman,
ahead, later.
They probably said some of the things that I was gonna just repeat, but the bottom line is, can we show the true unserved areas and separate those from the census tract? So we can actually see where people are not being served.
that's what the map that's up there right now does.
Can we
Eric,
zoom
flip it
in
back
and
to the
see it?
FCC map.
I
and
want
we'll-
to be able to see
Like
it.
that,
It's on the DCA website.
this right here was the FCC map, and now Eric will show you what we can see, the true unserved areas in white on this one.
Right, but can you zoom in and see exactly where those areas
Yes, we
are
can.
and who's not being served?
Let me tell you, that's a great point and a good time for me to introduce Cindy West. Cindy, stand up so we can see you here. Cindy is my administrative assistant and Senator Harbison's, and she will have access to the website, and Eric's going to teach her how to manipulate it and do it. He just went through the data they can pull up, and if you need help with this, come to our office, 432, and she will work through the website with you. And I have blown up copies of the maps, poster boards. I'm going to bring them in here next time. If you're a visual person like I am, want to kind of tactile, want to see it and touch and feel it instead of look over somebody's shoulder on a computer screen, we have those maps that will also be of assistance to you as you sort through these problems. Senator Butler, other?
I just want to say something about Cindy. Cindy used to be in my street, too.
All right. Well, she's a keeper. You can't have her back.
I
Okay.
know.
Senator Tippins, the gentleman who deferred his time to the minority leader.
I do think the statement you made is probably gets to the heart of the issue. I'm not sure this is a want to issue. I think it's a funding issue. And I think it's very much akin to electrification in the state of Georgia. If you look at the history of electrification, those areas that either were served by governmental authorities like TVA or private entities, the private entities went where there was enough critical mass to support the capital investment, and where there was no return on investment from the private market, there was no investment. I mean, I think I said this last year. In West Cobb, where I live, in 1938, there was no electric power outside of any incorporated area. It was the Rural Electrification Administration. The federal government realized that if power was going to go in more remote areas, the federal government was going to have to participate in it. And that was done through the Rural Electrification Administration. I think we need to realize from a standpoint, I don't think from a private sector standpoint, the investment's going to be there unless there's a potential return on investment, and it always is a function of densities. And I think we're going to have an administration of some type that has federal funding that can run access in these rural areas if we're committed to do that, because there's not going to be private funding where there's no return on investment. So, I mean, I'm all for serving the rural areas. I think that the pandemic in our schools have shown the students that do not have access. I mean, I think all the students who are getting virtual learning, the vast majority of them, it's not equal to face-to-face instruction. But when you don't even have access to virtual, you're clearly behind the 8 ball. So I think whatever it takes to get the funding, and I think it's going to have to be. I believe it's going to have to be a federal program unless we can identify a funding source for a state authority or administration. But if we're committed to this, I think that's what it's going to take.
All right. Okay, I'm going to recognize one more question or comment from Senator Harbison. We're at 4:21. Our time ends in here at 4:15.
Make sure, Mr. Chairman, by your leave, sir, if I may recognize the Honorable David Lucas as well, who also went across the state holding those hearings and following Senator Gooch as well. So it was we doubled down on it and got some real good information to probably contribute to solving this problem.
That's great. One of my favorites, Senator Lucas, I got you lit up, so you might give us some words of wisdom here. First of all, welcome back from COVID. I understand you fought that tiger and whipped it.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on this side of the earth. I think that it showed us that economic development can't happen in rural Georgia unless broadband is there. There's no way to access the things that they need to do as a business person without broadband. Telemedicine is the same way. You can't fix rural health until you get it wired in rural Georgia, where with telemedicine, you can have a specialist that's in California that can examine a patient right here. And so it is a monumental task, and it's going to take some money. Now, I did get a brochure that the EMCs put out, what they were doing, and it was basically, to me, it was a good business thing, even though I think they are losing on that end and going to try to recoup at the other end. But they made it real available for those folks to come in to use their lines or poles in trying to put broadband in these neighborhoods. But it's all about the dollar. I mean, if you can't get the return on your money, you as a private business person, you're not going to put that money in. The corporations are the same way. So government has to be a part of this solution.
With that, we will be adjourned for the day. We will meet again. When do we meet, Cindy? Is it Tuesday at what time? 3:30. 3:30, same room. See y'all then. Thanks for being here.